In the dark wooden room, moonlight slipped through the cracks and cast the shadows of two bodies tangled together, breathless after years of silence. Lena Carter, Black Widow, 46, trembled in the arms of Samuel Hayes, the young man who once called her shelter, now burning with desire for her. Yet in the heat of that forbidden closeness, pounding knocks rattled the door, the sheriff's voice and neighbors' cries rang out on the porch. The blanket slid from the edge of the bed, drifting like a witness to their sin. What choice could they make when love just found was already dragged into the light? The autumn wind swept through Silver Creek like a cold blade, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the whisper of change. On the second-floor porch of the worn boarding house, Lena Carter stood still, her hands tightening around the curtain. She had just turned 46 this year. A widow for 8 years, she made a living by letting out a few meager rooms and selling cornbread to passing miners. That afternoon, the slanting light painted the prairie in amber gold. Dust rose thick on the road leading into town. Lena narrowed her eyes toward the haze. A figure emerged from the cloud, tall, steady in stride, his wide-brimmed hat shading his eyes, yet she knew him at once. Her heart slammed hard against her chest. Samuel Hayes, the boy who once slept on her kitchen floor when his father came home drunk, who had eaten at her family's table as if he were her own son. At 19, Samuel had left Silver Creek with Elias, Lena's boy, driving cattle far across the plains. Since then, no word. 7 years gone. The one walking toward her was no longer the thin-shouldered, stubborn-eyed youth she remembered. This was a man grown, broad in the chest, marked by danger and distance. The evening sun lit the square line of his jaw, bronzed and sweat-streaked. Lena found herself smoothing her dark skirt, her pulse racing. She knew her age well enough. The silver threads coiled in her hair, the lines gathering at her eyes, the quiet years carved into her skin. But for one breath, all of it fell away. Samuel paused at the gate. His hand rested on the latch, hesitant, fingers trembling slightly. Through the glass pane she caught his gray-blue eyes. For an instant she was 20 again, sitting on the porch, hearing the neighbor boy call out, "Miss Carter, may I stay tonight?" No longer a boy. A man now stood at her gate. The knock came. 3 firm strikes, thunder splitting the hush. Lena turned to the mirror by the door. The reflection showed her silver-flecked hair, her dark skin lined with years, her green eyes heavy with loss. Yet her figure still carried its fullness, proud and unreadable. "Mrs. Carter." His voice came low and rough, like sand and smoke. She drew a deep breath and opened the door. The world seemed to halt. Before her was not the youth who once played wooden guns with her son in the yard. This was a man whose eyes held the weight of far horizons. A shadow of beard roughened his jaw, his chest strained against a faded shirt. When he lifted his hat, sunburnt brown hair fell across his brow, lending his face a worn strength. "Samuel." Her voice barely rose, as if testing whether the name still lived on her lips. He dipped his head, his gaze locked on hers, not the look of a boy at a woman older than him, but a steady, heavy stare that stirred fire in her belly. She stepped back, her voice unsteady. "Come in." The hallway echoed under his boots. The silence of the house filled with the weight of his breath. Samuel followed her into the kitchen, the same room where he had once eaten roasted corn and laughed beside Elias. The air was strung tight as wire. Lena turned to set water on the stove, but her hand fumbled, sending a spoon clattering. Samuel bent first, his fingers brushing the back of her hand. A fleeting touch, yet a jolt ran the length of her spine. They pulled back, eyes meeting in a silence thick with all that had never been said. He spoke, voice tight. "There's something I need to tell you." Lena gripped the chair, a weight sinking into her chest. In his eyes, she read pain, the kind that foretold a truth sharp enough to change the rest of her days. Her heart thundered, not from fear alone. Behind it pulsed another rhythm, one long buried. "Lena Carter, you've gone mad," she told herself. "That man was once the boy under this roof." Yet when Samuel's gaze burned into her, contained, fierce, her heart struck wild, like that of a girl learning desire for the first time. In the kitchen, the oil lamp flickered as though wrestling with the draft slipping through the cracks. Lena poured boiling water into an old porcelain pot, her hands trembling without rest. Samuel sat across from her, his broad frame filling the wooden chair, the room, so long accustomed to silence, now pressed tight by his presence. He held his hat in both hands, turning it over and over. Veins rose stark against his sunburned skin, faintly quivering. Lena saw it, and her heart sank heavy. She knew whatever words he carried would not be kind. "Samuel," her voice rasped, "say it plain." "Don't circle around," he lifted his gaze. The storm dark of his gray-blue eyes fell on her, lips moving but soundless, until at last he forced it out. "Elias." One name was enough to crush her chest. Her only son, the one light left to a widow's world. Lena gripped the table edge, the wood biting into her fingers. Is he hurt?" Samuel swallowed hard, his throat jumping. He looked down at the stained floorboards. "No, there's no chance left, Mrs. Carter. Elias is gone." The words dropped like a hammer, splitting her world apart. Lena lurched upright, the chair clattering to the floor behind her. The room spun, as if the autumn wind had swept her whole being away. "No, it can't be." Samuel rose fast, reaching her just as she faltered. Strong arms wrapped tight, holding her steady. Against his chest, she fought for breath, her ears ringing until the only sound left was the pounding of her own heart. Leather, sweat, and the faint tang of sage clung to him. His heat pressed into her like a lifeline and a weight all at once. She forced a whisper through her grief. How did it happen?" Samuel bent his head against her hair, his voice roughened to a growl. "In Montana. Cattle thieves. They came for the herd. Elias stood his ground. Always brave. Too brave. I tried, but his breath broke jagged. I couldn't save him. I'm sorry, Lena. God, I am so sorry." Her chest heaved, tears spilling unchecked. 8 years of widowhood had taught Lena how to endure loneliness, but nothing had prepared her for this. Memories rushed like floodwater. Elias fishing at 10, Elias learning to ride at 15, the flash of his smile, now ash, burned away by a single word. Samuel's grip tightened as she sagged against him. That oak-solid shoulder became the only place left to rest her sorrow. Pressed to him, she caught the rhythm of his heart hammering fast, not just for grief, but with something deeper, unspoken, pulsing in time with her own. In that moment, beneath the weight of loss, something else stirred. Dangerous, trembling, but undeniable. "It wasn't your fault," she choked. "My boy. He lived by his own choosing." Samuel let slip a sound like a wounded man, low and torn. He pulled away, striding to the door, then swung back, fire in his eyes. "I should have stopped him. Should have kept him from risking it all. Elias, he was my brother in all but blood. I failed you both." "No." Lena shook her head, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Elias was the child I raised out of the ruins of my husband's death. I taught him to live honest, to live brave. And that bravery, it took him from me. But Samuel, the fault isn't yours." They held each other's eyes, no more than a step apart. In his gaze she saw not only grief that mirrored her own, but the shape of a man, hardened, raw, stirring the heart she thought long numbed. His hand lifted, hesitated mid-air, as though the space between them was a forbidden line. She did not move away. Amid the thick sorrow, that small gesture became their shared breath. At last, he let his hand fall, voice gravel low. "I brought his things. Letters, his watch, a few belongings. They're yours," but Lena could not yet think of keepsakes. All she could feel was the lingering heat of his arms, a fragile cord holding her from tumbling into the abyss. The night pressed heavy at the window. The lamp cast a wan, yellow glow across Samuel's face, carving the plains of a man weathered and unyielding. Lena realized his return had not only delivered death's cruel message, but also brought a strange, unsettling strength, one she longed to cling to, even as every part of her wished to flee. Evening had begun to settle, the last light slipping through the narrow window, scattering broken beams across the wooden floor. Elias's small room lay at the far end of the upstairs hall, a place Lena had barely left since Samuel brought the news. The space, though silent, still breathed of her son, leather worn into his old boots, the faint trace of plain soap lingering in the bedding. Lena sat on the narrow bed, holding a wooden top Elias had whittled at 10 years old. The carving was rough and uneven, yet it carried the weight of boyhood. She pressed it to her chest, tears falling onto the grooves, soaking deep into the grain. Samuel stood in the doorway. He did not speak, only watched quietly. His shoulder leaned into the frame, his shadow stretching long over the floor, as if he belonged to the dusk itself. In his hands he carried a small tray, a steaming cup of coffee and a few slices of cornbread she had forgotten since morning. "You should drink something," he said, voice low, rough, caught between command and plea. Lena lifted her red-rimmed eyes and nodded faintly. Samuel stepped inside, setting the tray on the table by the window. Light fell across his face, carving harder lines into his features, yet softening his eyes with a gentleness she had not seen in any man since her husband. He poured coffee into a cup and brought it to her. She reached out, and her fingers brushed his. The touch was fleeting, almost accidental, yet both froze at once. Samuel's hand was warm, broad, scarred. The calluses rasped lightly against her skin. Lena drew back quickly, clutching the cup as if to shield herself, but her heart pounded, not only from grief, but from something new, shadowed and frightening. "Thank you," she whispered, eyes fixed on the steam rising from the cup, avoiding the truth blazing in his gaze. Samuel sank into the chair by the table, yet his eyes never strayed from her. He offered no more words, only his presence, filling the hollow air. She sipped, the bitterness sharp on her tongue, but strength seeped back into her limbs after days of emptiness. The room around them stood still as a shrine. On the shelf rested books Elias had left unfinished, their spines marked by slips of paper. His winter coat still hung on the peg, dust settling lightly over it. Lena's eyes wandered, catching each object like a wound that bled memory. "Elias always saw you as a brother," she murmured, her voice trembling. Samuel clasped his hands, head bowed low. "And I saw him the same. We crossed winters together on the plains, slept on frozen ground, split what little we had. He was the best part of me." Lena lifted her gaze, meeting the dark depth of his eyes. Between them stretched a distance so small she could have reached and touched him. Instead, she bit her lip, clutching the cup like a frail wall against herself. An autumn draft slipped through the window, stirring the curtain as though it carried unspoken words. Samuel shifted his chair closer. His nearness brought with it a warmth that pushed back the cold of the room. "I taught him to live right," she whispered, as though confessing. "But it was that very goodness that took him from me. If I hadn't raised him so, he might still be alive." Samuel leaned closer, laying his broad hand gently on her arm. Another touch. This time she did not flinch. The weight of it held her steady, kept her from breaking apart. "Don't blame yourself," he said, voice raw. "Elias chose his road. He lived as a man ought, and he died as a brave one. You gave him everything." Her vision blurred, yet no sob came. Instead, a thick knot filled her throat, born not only of grief but of the closeness between them. Samuel's presence did not banish her pain, but it spared her from carrying it alone. They remained like that a long while, the woman clutching her son's relics, the man silent as a pillar. No need for hollow comforts, only breath, eyes, and hands that brushed enough to remind them both they still lived. Outside, the sky dimmed into purple, shadows creeping in. Inside, lamplight cast their silhouettes upon the wall, one small and folded, the other broad and sheltering. Between those shapes, the space invisible and unspoken drew closer, closing in by an inch more. The days that followed pressed down like a stone on the chest. Silver Creek slid slowly into winter, cold winds sweeping from the northern mountains, seeping through every gap in the boarding house walls. Lena Carter still woke early, kindling the fire, cooking breakfasts she rarely touched. But one thing had changed. Samuel Hayes remained. He did not leave as she had expected. Instead, Samuel quietly took on the small burdens of a house long worn thin. In the mornings he rose before Lena, splitting logs out in the yard, the strike of his axe ringing loud, filling the air with life. By noon, he climbed to the roof, mending shingles long broken. At dusk, he worked along the garden fence, tightening boards with patient hands. Often Lena stood at the kitchen window, her hands busy with pots and pans while her eyes drifted outward, following his tall figure against the gray sky. His movements were sharp and certain, shoulders carrying weight without complaint. The house, once sunk in silence, now echoed with new sounds, hammer strikes, the groan of timber, the tread of heavy boots along the porch. Yet his presence did not dissolve her grief. It thickened the air, left her restless. Meals became strange rituals. They sat across from each other at the long wooden table, spoons scraping faintly, words scarce. Lena ladled soup, her eyes flicking toward Samuel only to dart away. Sometimes she found him watching the way she rolled up her sleeves, the way she broke a piece of cornbread, even the way she dabbed sweat from her brow. That gaze, neither a brother's nor a familiar friend's, carried something else. Weight, heat, like embers smoldering beneath ash. One afternoon, Lena went to the well for water. The old bucket slipped from her grip, clanging hard against the stone rim. She gasped, bending down, but Samuel was there at once, his large hand catching hers, halting her. Skin brushed skin, warmth cutting through the chill. "Let me," he said, voice low, gravel thick. She nodded, pulling back quickly, as though burned. Yet when she stepped away, her heart still hammered, her fingers tingling with the echo of his touch. Night deepened the suffocation. Wind howled against the windows. Boards creaked as though groaning. Lena lay awake, eyes wide, hearing Samuel's steps below. He rarely slept early, sometimes mending broken tools, sometimes sitting silent by the fire. His shadow moved across the floorboards, cast upward through the crack of light spilling from the stairwell. The weight pressed into her chest, not the weight of hatred, but of desire bound tight. She realized she was listening for those sounds. Chair legs scraping, a cup set gently down, like a living clock reminding her she was not alone. One evening, as Lena carried a pot of stew to the table, Samuel rose to take it from her. His fingers brushed her wrist, just enough to make her falter, nearly spilling the pot. Samuel steadied it, their eyes locking. In the wavering glow of the fire, she saw the storm hidden behind his steady face. She turned quickly, sitting down, her pulse erratic. He set the pot down, returned to his place. No words passed. None were needed. The silence itself spoke too loudly. Day followed day, their lives wound together beneath one roof, tangled in the cramped air of things left unsaid. Lena feared him, yet was drawn toward him. Each glance, each fleeting touch pierced like a needle into the wound of her loss. But it also reminded her she still lived. Outside, Silver Creek braced for the harsh winter. But within the wooden house on the main road, two souls moved along a thin line, between grief and renewal, between what was right and what was forbidden. And Lena knew, sooner or later, that line would break. That night, rain swept over Silver Creek, each drop drumming against the tin roof, like the impatient tapping of a restless hand. In the small kitchen, Lena sat at the table, needle in hand, her motions empty, thread rising and falling without thought. The oil lamp cast a faint yellow glow, soft across her weary face, deepening the lines around her eyes. Samuel sat opposite, one arm braced on the table, turning an empty wooden cup in circles. The chair creaked, blending with the rain outside. For a long while he said nothing, only watched her. Those gray-blue eyes pinned her in place. "Lena." His voice came rough, thickened by whiskey and what he had long carried inside. "There's something I can't keep buried any longer." She looked up, brows drawn. "What is it, Samuel?" He straightened, breath rising hard, then let fall the words both had avoided for weeks. "I never thought of you as a mother." Not once Lena froze. The needle slipped from her hand, striking the floor with a faint clink that echoed like a gunshot. Her heart jolted, horrified, and strangely, almost relieved. "Samuel," she stammered, "what are you saying?" "I took you in, He cut across her, voice urgent. You gave me shelter when my father was drunk, food when I was starving. But in my heart, I never saw you as a mother. Even when Elias called you Ma, I envied him. Her fingers whitened around the table edge. Shock stole her breath, yet somewhere in memory, old images rose. The times she'd caught the burning look of a 16-year-old boy, fiercer than any child's gaze should be. She had told herself, he's confused, that's all. But now, before her, stood a man, strong and full, confessing what she had once feared to name. Samuel, it's wrong. You're my son's age, and Elias, her voice broke on the name. He pushed back his chair, circling the table toward her. His breath carried the scent of rain and wood smoke, warm and close. I know. I know what people would say. But Lena, all the years I rode the trails, I never stopped thinking of you. Not as memory, but as the woman I wanted. I can't pretend any longer. She shifted back, but the wall pressed firm behind her. No retreat left. Samuel loomed before her, shadow swallowing the lamplight. His large hand lifted her chin, drawing her eyes into the fire of his own. You can send me away right now. Call me mad, ungrateful. But before you do, be honest with me, Lena. Did you never feel it? Not once? Her lips trembled, words choking. She wanted to cry out that it was sin, that he was like her son. But the truth caught in her throat. Instead came memory, his hand steadying hers at the well, his eyes following her movements at the table, his arms catching her when grief had nearly crushed her. Her heart then had raced, shaken, not only from sorrow. Her eyes brimmed, yet she could not deny. She turned her face aside, clutching her skirt to hide, her trembling. Samuel sighed, voice raw. I see it. You're afraid. You feel it too, but you're afraid. Afraid of this town's judgment. Afraid of ghosts past. But Lena, I am not afraid. She looked back at him, her chest torn open with a surge of feeling long held down. Her whisper came like a confession. There are moments when I noticed you more than I should. And I hated myself for it. At those words, Samuel's eyes shut, as though freed. He leaned close, his forehead nearly touching hers, breath hot between them. You're not alone, he murmured. And if it is sin, then I'll bear it all my life. Silence pulled tight as a bowstring. Only the rain on the roof and the drum of their hearts filled the room. Lena shut her eyes, knowing that a single tilt closer would shatter the last line left. And once crossed, they could never return. Samuel drew back half a step, giving her space. Tell me to leave and I'll go tonight, he said, voice hoarse. But if not, I'll stay, no matter what tongues wag in this town. Lena sank into her chair, pressing her forehead into her hand. No words came, but the truth, dragged into the open, sat heavy between them. The forbidden bond was real, and there was no denying it now. Night draped Silver Creek in its cold cloak. A thin crescent moon hung low, casting pale silver over the yard, soft against the thin veil of mist. Lena turned and turned in her bed, unable to sleep, listening to the wind moan beyond the shutters. From below came the sound of Samuel's footsteps, heavy at first, then breaking off, replaced by something else. She rose, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, and moved to the window. Pulling the curtain aside, her breath caught. In the yard, Samuel stood bare-chested, shoulders gleaming in moonlight. He swung the axe hard, each strike splitting wood as though tearing through the torment in his chest. Sweat glistened along the muscles of his back, vapor rising from his breath in the frozen air. He moved with sheer force, yet in her eyes there was something more. A stark beauty that belonged not to the boy she once sheltered, but to a man grown and unshaken. Her palm pressed against the cold glass, trembling. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the hunger she had buried too long. As if he felt it, Samuel stopped, lifted his head. Their eyes locked across the yard, across the pane. His stare burned steady, fierce. Lena dropped the curtain, but it was too late. He had seen. She knew she could not hide. The door below opened. The slow, weighted tread of his boots climbed the stairs. Lena stood frozen, gripping the edge of the table, her heart drumming like war. A knock. His voice came rough, hoarse. "Lena, I can't sleep." Her throat was dry. Silence stretched. Then she whispered, "Come in." The door creaked open. Samuel stepped inside, half his body bare, trousers damp with sweat. Moonlight carved the rise of every muscle, as though hewn from stone by some hard and tender hand. He closed the door, leaned back against it, his eyes fixed on her. "I told you, I'm not afraid." Lena edged back until her shoulders met the wall. "Samuel, this is wrong." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Yes, but it's true." The air grew thick. His breath warmed the space between them, mingling with the scent of sweat, wood, and something raw, wholly male. His hand lifted, brushing the edge of her shawl. Fingers traced the fabric's line, slow, deliberate, until they found bare skin. A touch so slight, yet her whole body shook. "Look at me, Lena," he whispered. She raised her eyes. The gray-blue there blazed, not with the gaze of a boy, but with the certainty of a man. Her breathing quickened. She knew one turn away would end it, yet her feet rooted still. Samuel bent, pressing his brow to hers, voice a murmur. "Tell me to go if you mean it." The denial was poised on her tongue, but her lips could not shape it. Instead, she shut her eyes, letting silence speak. And then his mouth found hers. A trembling spark, then flame. Lena gasped, her hands clutching his shoulders, nails digging faintly into hard flesh. Samuel pulled her in, crushing her to his chest. The kiss deepened, hungry, breaking down years of walls, of age, of loss, of names and roles that no longer mattered. Two souls clung to the only breath they could share. Samuel lifted her easily, her arms twining around his neck, her body weightless against his strength. He laid her on the bed, never breaking his gaze as though memorizing every line of her face. "You're beautiful," he whispered, voice unsteady but sure. Lena cupped his cheek, whispering back, "Samuel, we will pay for this." He kissed her palm. "I'll pay it gladly." His hands moved, steady, undoing fabric piece by piece. Lena trembled, yet she did not resist. Her fingers traced the corded lines of his back, every muscle taut beneath burning skin. Moonlight spilled across them, folding their bodies into one. No longer widow and wayward boy, but woman and man. Life calling life. Their breaths tangled, the bed frame groaning like witness to the forbidden. Every touch, every clasped hand, every look carried the loneliness of years, the hunger to be held at last. In Samuel's arms, Lena felt herself reborn. 8 barren years of widowhood burned away into heat. She no longer thought of judgment, nor of Silver Creek's eyes. There was only this moment, only him. Later, when at last she lay spent, her head against his chest, the hammer of his heartbeat filled her ears. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not for sorrow, but for knowing she had stepped across a line that could never be undone. Samuel's arms tightened around her. He kissed her damp hair, whispering, "No matter what, I will stay." Outside, the rain had ceased. Moonlight shone clear upon the room, across 2 entwined forms. And in that moment, between the shadow of grief and the blaze of desire, a forbidden love was forged, fierce, perilous, undeniable. Morning light slipped through the thin curtain, catching dust motes drifting in the air. Lena stirred awake to find herself still held in Samuel's arms. His breath came steady, his young face eased into peace. For a moment, she thought she dreamed, but the marks of his mouth still lingered on her skin, the warmth of his body still pressed into her own. What happened in the night was no dream. She sat up quickly, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. Her heart raced now, not from desire, but from fear. Silver Creek was too small, every eye too sharp, every whisper a blade. The pounding on the door shattered the hush. Thud, thud, thud! Samuel leapt up, tugging his shirt over his shoulders. Sheriff Jackson's voice rang from the porch, deep and stern. "Mrs. Carter!" "Open the door." "We know someone's inside." Lena's face blanched. Pulling her dress close, she muttered, "Dear God, they know." Boots stamped heavy on the steps. A shrill voice followed. Martha Patterson, the sharpest gossip in Silver Creek. Shameful. A widow, old enough to know better, keeping a young man under her roof. Samuel's fists clenched. He turned to Lena, his voice firm. "I won't hide." "Not anymore." The door burst open. Sheriff Jackson led the way, beside him Reverend Hayes, his face grave, and behind them Mrs. Patterson, eyes flashing with judgment. The room itself betrayed them. Samuel, hair tousled, shirt half-buttoned. Lena, cheeks flushed with shame. No other proof was needed. "Elizabeth Carter," Reverend Hayes intoned, his voice heavy, "you bring disgrace. This whole town has been whispering, and now truth lies plain before us." Mrs. Patterson's words snapped like a whip. "Disgusting. That boy you once raised as kin. Now this." Lena bowed her head, her heart twisting. But Samuel stepped forward, placing himself between her and their scorn, his eyes burning. "Enough. She has done no wrong. I am here because I chose it. I'm no foster son, no object for your wagging tongues. I am a man, and I love her." The declaration cracked like a gunshot. Sheriff Jackson's brow furrowed, his hand settling on the butt of his revolver. "Carter Hayes, watch your words. Speaking such madness before the town will bring you nothing but trouble." Samuel squared his shoulders, chest rising. "It isn't madness. It's truth. I have loved Lena Carter for years, and today I will not hide it." The crowd behind them erupted in whispers. Neighbors pressed in, their faces tight with shock and hunger for scandal. Lena trembled, her voice trapped. Samuel turned, grasped her hand, lifting it high for all to see. "She has lost husband and son. She has borne a life alone. If any of you still have a conscience, you will let her find joy." Mrs. Patterson shrieked. "Joy? You mean shame. You disgrace her husband's name, her boy's memory. "You're nothing but a young fool taking advantage of a lonely woman," Samuel roared back, eyes aflame. "No one is taking advantage." I begged for her love. "I will give everything to protect her." The sheriff raised his hand for quiet. "Hayes, best you leave Silver Creek before this goes too far. Folks won't stand for this arrangement." For the first time, Lena raised her head, her voice ringing clear. "That's enough, Sheriff. This is my home. Samuel is my guest. You have no right to drive him out." The crowd buzzed, sharp whispers striking her like stones. "Shameful. Disgrace. Young vulture." Samuel turned to her, his grip tightening, his eyes shining in the pale morning light. He raised his voice so all could hear. "Call us what you will. I will not leave her. I love Lena Carter, and I will stand beside her, even if the whole town turns its back." A silence fell, heavy and raw. Faces froze, torn between fury and doubt. Reverend Hayes shook his head, sighing. Mrs. Patterson spun away, spitting curses under her breath. Sheriff Jackson finally dropped his hand from his gun belt, leaving only a warning. "Then be ready for the cost." When the door slammed shut behind them, Lena collapsed into a chair, her body trembling, her face pale. Samuel knelt before her, his eyes filled with pain yet set with steel. "You don't need to fear," he whispered, for the first time calling her soft, intimate. "They don't own your life. You have the right to choose happiness." Tears welled as Lena reached for his face. Outside, the murmurs still swirled like a storm, but inside there was only the two of them, and the vow Samuel had spoken aloud for all to hear. Last night, they had given their bodies. This morning, he had given something greater. His open defiance, his promise to fight for love. And Lena knew nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Rumor spread faster than any wind through Silver Creek. By dawn, every corner of town knew of the widow Lena Carter and the young man Samuel Hayes. Whispers no longer bothered with shadows. Fingers pointed openly in the street. Voices spoke without shame in the bakery line. Words slicing sharp as knives. Disgraceful. She has no shame. That boarding house is nothing but a den of sin. The house, once quiet but not empty, now stood hollow. Tenants packed their bags in silence, leaving keys on the table without so much as a farewell. Doors slammed shut one by one until nothing remained but bare rooms and cold mattresses. Lena stood in the hallway, hearing the last latch fall, her chest aching. Samuel came in from the yard, dust still clinging to his hands. He caught her gaze, sad, heavy, and without bowing his head, laid his rough palm on her shoulder, pressing lightly, saying without words, "I'm still here." The next morning, Lena carried her basket down to the bakery, as she had for years. Martha Patterson's shop was full, sweet smells of fresh bread filling the air. But when Lena crossed the threshold, voices ceased. Every head turned, eyes colder than the winter wind. "2 loaves, please," Lena said, her tone steady. Martha lifted her brows, lips curling faint. "Sorry, all sold out." Lena's eyes flicked to the counter behind, trays of golden bread still steaming. She knew the lie, but she refused to beg or bristle. She nodded, turned, and walked away. Her spine stayed straight, her gaze fixed forward. At the general store, it grew harsher. Old Wilson busied himself with sacks, pretending not to see her coins on the counter. After waiting long enough, Lena gathered her money back, leaving without a word. Outside, young wives tittered behind gloved hands, laughter sharp as needles. That evening, Samuel brought home flour and salt, bought from a ranch on the edge of town where gossip held no sway. Lena touched the bags, eyes moist. "I don't want you despised because of me." He tipped her chin up, forcing her eyes to his. "Let them talk. I only care that you've got enough to eat, enough to stand tall." Days rolled heavy, the weight of exile pressing down. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. Church bells still rang Sunday morning, but Lena knew her place among those pews was gone. Mothers yanked children aside when she passed, as though she carried contagion. Still, she did not bow. Each morning she dressed proper, shawl pinned neat, steps steady into the market. Every glare struck her like an arrow, but she walked through them all. Pride stirred inside her, pride of a woman who had borne loss and would not let judgment claim her life. Whenever her legs threatened to falter, she heard Samuel's boots behind her. He walked at her side, stride firm, his tall frame a shield, and when whispers sharpened loud enough to carry, Samuel stopped, eyes cutting cold across the crowd. That silence, taut as wire, was enough to choke the talk back. One evening, Lena sat on the porch, watching night swallow the town. Lamps flickered faint across windows, but to her they no longer glowed with warmth. They were eyes, watching, measuring. She sighed. "I've lost everything, Samuel." The house, friends, my good name Samuel, set a steaming cup of tea in her hands. He sat beside her, voice firm. "You still have me." She turned, catching the light in his eyes, and when his calloused hand covered hers, it did not waver. Strength passed through his touch, chasing the chill from her chest. So the days found rhythm again. Samuel fixed the barn roof while Lena kneaded dough, selling bread to poor families too busy surviving to gossip. Smoke still curled from the chimney. The ring of his hammer still echoed. The scent of stew still drifted from her stove. Against the wall of scorn, they carved a pocket of peace. Once, while Lena hung laundry, the wind caught her dress, tangling it on the high line. She stretched on tiptoe, struggling, until Samuel came, unhooking it with ease. The gust tossed her skirt, whipped her hair loose. Samuel froze, eyes locked on her, warm and fierce. She met his gaze, her breath catching. In that moment, every sneer and whisper in town faded. There was only his look, and the truth that in her banishment she was not alone. That night in bed, Lena thought of the days past, the doors closed, the scornful laughter, the shame pressed on her name. And then she thought of Samuel, of his hand raised before the crowd, of his voice steady and unshaken. "I love her." A tear slipped onto the pillow, not for grief, but for knowing she was still worth loving. In that love, Lena found her pride reborn, the pride to lift her head and walk unbroken through a town turned against her. Silver Creek never lacked noise once the Silver Dollar Saloon lit its lamps. Banjo strings tangled with coarse laughter, glasses clashed sharp, and whiskey mixed with smoke until the air turned thick. That night, Samuel strode in, his shadow stretching long under the swaying lanterns, his eyes cold as steel. He had left the house without a word to Lena, only muttering, "I need some things." But Lena knew, better than anyone, that his chest burned with fury. As the door swung wide, heads lifted. A strange hush rippled through the room. breaking a heartbeat later into jeers. "Well, look who we got," Tom Bradley, a rail hand built like an ox, bellowed. "The boy who beds an old widow." Laughter roared from his table. Samuel's fists clenched, knuckles cracking like kindling. He walked slow to the bar, ordered whiskey. The bartender hesitated, then set the glass down, his eyes flicking nervously as if bracing for the storm. Pete Wilson, drunk as ever, slammed his bottle, sloshing liquor across the table. "You think you're a man, Samuel? Living off a woman's skirts? You know what they call her in this town." Samuel turned, lightning flashing in his gaze. He set the whiskey down untouched. His voice cut low, hard. "Say it again, and I'll make you swallow every word." A burst of laughter answered, but none dared rise. Only Dave Murphy, the foulest of mouths, leaned back in his chair, sneering. "You think you guard her honor? She's a joke. A 46-year-old widow, and you in her bed? Filthy." The punch came faster than eyes could follow. Samuel's fist cracked against Dave's jaw, sending him sprawling, glasses shattering as he hit the floor. Chaos erupted. Tom lunged, roaring, but Samuel's fist buried into his gut, folding him to the sawdust. Pete swung a bottle, glass whistling past Samuel's head. Samuel ducked, drove his shoulder forward, sent Pete crashing into the tables, splinters flying. Shouts filled the room, some cheering, some scrambling clear. Chairs toppled, glass broke. Men cursed and stumbled in the smoky haze. Samuel stood like a storm's eye, chest heaving, eyes blazing with fire. He turned in a slow circle, staring each man down. Then his voice thundered, shaking the rafters. "I love her. Do you hear me? I love Lena Carter, and I dare any man here to shame her name again." The saloon froze. Faces shrank back under the blaze of his stare. Even those who had laughed now edged away, cowed. Dave, blood dripping down his chin, staggered upright, spite still spitting through broken teeth. "You're a fool. Defending a whore. Better I die than—" Samuel was on him in a flash, one hand clamped on his collar, lifting him clean from the floor. Dave's feet kicked like a snared hog, hands clawing uselessly. "Shut your mouth," Samuel's voice broke with rage. "One more word and I'll crush the life out of you." The sound of bones straining in Samuel's grip hushed the room to silence. Men called for the sheriff. Women shrieked. The saloon doors burst wide. Lena rushed in, breathless, her face white. She had run at the first sound of the commotion. "Samuel," she cried, reaching him. "Enough!" "Put him down." But Samuel's grip only tightened, his muscles like iron, his face twisted in fury. Dave gagged, his skin turning dark. Lena clutched Samuel's arm, her small hands trembling against his corded strength. "Listen to me. Don't do this. Don't damn yourself for the likes of him." His eyes wavered. He looked down at her, eyes glistening, cheeks wet, voice breaking. Slowly, the fire drained. His hand eased. Dave collapsed to the floor, coughing, curling like a beaten dog. Samuel stood rigid, chest heaving, his hand trembling as though still caught in the storm. Lena pulled him back, grounding him. In that moment, she alone held the rope that kept him from falling into darkness. Sheriff Jackson shoved through the crowd, his hand on the holster. "That's enough, Hayes. You've made a mess big enough tonight." Samuel faced him square, voice raw but steady. "I won't let them slander her again. Never." The sheriff studied him, measuring the blaze in his eyes, then slowly let his hand fall from the gun. "Then learn your temper, or you'll both pay for it." Samuel said nothing. He turned, found Lena's hand, gripped it hard, and led her through the parted crowd. Whispers chased them, but he did not falter. Outside, the night wind cut sharp, whipping her skirts. Samuel's hand shook still from fury. Lena held it firm, whispering through her tears, "You defended me, but if you kill, I'll lose you forever. I cannot bear that." He stopped in the empty street, pressed his brow against hers, breath ragged. "I'm sorry. But you must know I can't stand to hear them drag you down." She wrapped her arms around him, unashamed in the open street. "I know," she murmured, "and that is why I need you alive, not behind bars, not buried in the ground." In each other's arms, in the cold wind of Silver Creek, they understood. Their love was not only forbidden, it was dangerous enough to cost them everything. Yet when Samuel pulled her tighter, when Lena leaned against his strength, both knew they would not turn back. The moon had sunk behind the ridge when Samuel and Lena returned to the boarding house. The wooden door closed with a weary groan, shutting out the muffled whispers that drifted from the saloon on the night wind. The kitchen lay dim, lit only by a single oil lamp. Its glow threw their shadows tall against the wall, two shapes unsteady after a stormy night. Samuel let go of her hand to heap wood on the fire. Flames leapt high, lighting the bruise darkening his cheek and the split across his lip. Lena's hands trembled as she dipped a cloth into water and pressed it against his skin. He flinched, just barely, but his eyes never left hers. "You shouldn't be the one tending me," she whispered, voice hoarse with worry and exhaustion. His calloused hand closed over her wrist, steadying it. In the firelight, his eyes burned steady. "I won't let you live another day trapped in this place." She froze. In his gaze, she saw more than anger. She saw resolve. "I have a plan," Samuel said, voice low but firm. "We leave Silver Creek, head west, all the way to California. I've got some savings from the cattle drives. Out there, I've friends who'll give me work. We can start over." Lena staggered back a step, heart clenched. "Start over? Samuel, do you know what you're saying? I'm 46 years old. I've no youth left to chase wild dreams. My life is here, this house, my husband's grave, Elias's memory." Her voice broke at her son's name. Samuel closed the space, his rough hands gripping her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "It's because of those memories you can't stay. This town has turned them into chains. You deserve happiness, and I want to be the one to give it." She wrenched free, bracing both palms against the table. Her shoulders shook. "They'll say we ran because we were ashamed. They'll say we're sinners hiding from judgment." "Let them," Samuel answered, hard and certain. He stepped behind her, his voice dropping low. "You've lived your life beneath their stares. And what did they give you in return? Loneliness, scorn, empty rooms in a dying inn. Live once for yourself," Lena's silence stretched, broken only by the fire's snap. She turned, eyes wet and rimmed with red. "And if we go, what then? I'm old, Samuel. I can't give you children, nor the long years you deserve. All I have are the scraps left, stitched with wounds that never heal." His jaw set. Suddenly he dropped to his knees, the thud of bone on wood echoing through the small room. His work-rough hands clasped hers, tight and trembling. "Listen to me," he said. his voice breaking yet clear as bell steel. I want nothing but you. I don't care for years or children or what the world says a man should want. I want mornings with you beside me, nights with you safe in my arms. I want to build a roof with you, no matter how small. I want my life bound to yours. Lena stared down, stunned. Young man knelt before her, steady flame in his eyes, his will unshaken. Something deep in her chest, locked for years, quivered to break open. Samuel, her hand rose, trembling, settling on his damp hair. You don't know the life I've lived. I had a family once. I lost everything. I'm terrified of losing again. His grip tightened. He lifted his head, his voice fierce. Then if we lose together. But I'll never leave you to face it alone. Tears spilled. She turned her face away, but he clung to her hands, his rough palms trembling against hers. Outside, the wind rattled the eaves, carrying the smell of fresh rain. At last she whispered, barely more than a breath. If we go, there is no way back. He nodded, eyes locked on hers. I know. And I am ready. In the wavering firelight, Lena gazed into those eyes, steady, relentless, anchoring her whole world. All the years of scorn, the weight of solitude, every empty night, tilted toward this single moment. Her breath hitched, tears dripping onto his knuckles. Tell me this isn't just heat of the moment. Tell me you won't regret when I grow old and frail. Samuel raised her hand, kissed it gently. His voice quivered, but the words rang iron true. I've carried this for half my life. I'll never regret it. I want you, today and every day after. A sob broke from her chest. Her fingers clutched him tight, both desperate and yielding. The decision remained unspoken, yet her heart had already turned toward him. The fire roared high, casting their figures sharp against the wall. A weary woman weeping, a young man kneeling, their hands bound together in a vow, dangerous but true. Silver Creek might have lain quiet beneath the night sky, but inside that worn boarding house, a choice had been planted. A choice that would change the rest of their lives. Dawn over Silver Creek came gray and heavy, clouds drifting slow as if the sky itself knew change was near. Lena stood by the window, fingers clutching the curtain, watching the street below. The town looked the same. Women carrying baskets, wagons rattling over frozen ruts, the same cold stares cast toward the boarding house. Yet inside her chest, everything had shifted. Samuel's words from the night before still rang in her ears, burning and unshakable. His vow, his plea, his promise. She had wept in his arms until sleep stole her, and when she woke, he was there, eyes steady, unwavering. In that moment she knew there was no going back. You'll go with me? She whispered, voice brittle as paper. His rough hand closed over hers, his eyes shining. Without you, I go nowhere. With you, I'll go anywhere. Warmth spread through her like a fire taking root. Lena drew a steady breath and nodded. Then we go. The morning filled with sounds the house hadn't heard in years. Drawers pulled open, trunks dragged across the floorboards, the shuffle of belongings chosen and left behind. Lena moved from room to room, selecting only what was needed: plain dresses, a few blankets, small kitchen tools. Everything else she abandoned to dust. But when she stepped into Elias's room, her knees faltered. Nothing had changed. The narrow bed still unmade, the winter coat still hanging limp on the wall, a half-read book resting open on the shelf. The faint smell of soap and young sweat lingered, a ghost that squeezed her chest tight. She sat at the edge of the bed, trembling hands tracing the pillow's worn seam. At the doorway, Samuel stood, silent, giving her the space grief demanded. Lena pulled open the drawer beneath the bed. Inside lay a small wooden box Elias once hid away. She lifted the lid. Neatly folded letters spilled out. Her words to her boy, yellowed with time. Tears blurred the ink as she pressed the box against her heart. "My son, I'll carry you with me." In memory, always Samuel knelt beside her, saying nothing. His calloused palm rested firm on her back, the only anchor she needed. At last she wiped her eyes and rose. Into the trunk she placed the box, the family Bible with its cracked leather spine, Elias's pocket watch, and a faded photograph of the three of them together. She closed the trunk with a final snap, as if sealing one life away to begin another. Downstairs, she paused at the long wooden table. Her fingers brushed the grooves her son once carved into the surface with a dull knife. Samuel touched the table too, his gaze asking the question her heart already knew. She gave a wan smile, eyes glistening. "I thought I'd die in this house. But without Elias, it's only an empty shell. I can't live inside a tomb anymore." "Then we leave it," Samuel said, his voice like iron. "We'll build a new table where no one dares judge us." By afternoon, the packing was done. A canvas bag of clothing, a single trunk of keepsakes, a few pans, a heavy quilt. Samuel shouldered his saddlebag with the money he had saved. The rest they left behind. On the porch, Lena hooked a ring of old keys to the nail in the doorframe, a silent farewell. The house that once rang with laughter and loss would stand as timber and echoes only. They sat side by side as dusk drew its shadows across the street. Lena leaned against his shoulder, her voice low. "Do you believe we can truly begin again?" He turned, his gaze hard with conviction. "We're not running, Lena. We're breaking chains. Wherever you are, that's where life begins." Her reply was silence, but her heart beat to the rhythm of his hand clasped tight over hers. That night, before she left it forever, Lena lit a single candle in Elias's room. She placed it beside his photograph, whispering, "You've gone on ahead, but I will carry your love with me. Give me courage, son, to live again. This time, not alone." The flame flickered, throwing her shadow tall on the wall. Not a broken widow, but a woman gathering strength from sorrow and hope alike. She blew the candle out, and darkness swept in. Yet within her chest, a different light had stirred. Samuel waited on the porch. When she stepped out, he took her hand, his rough grip warm and steady. "The Denver train leaves at dawn. From there, west to California. I sold the horse for our fare. We're ready." Lena nodded, feeling the weight lift from her chest. Pain still pulsed, but it no longer chained her. She raised her eyes to the sweep of stars. With Samuel's hand in hers, she knew the turning point had come. Tomorrow they would leave Silver Creek, leave behind judgment, loneliness, the slow death of living only in memory. Ahead lay miles of uncertainty, but for the first time in years, Lena felt the pulse of something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The town of Silver Creek still slept beneath a thin veil of fog when Lena Carter closed the latch on her small satchel. The hour was so early that roosters had not yet crowed, but the distant whistle of the Denver line cut sharp through the hush, a sound that belonged to those brave enough to leave all that was familiar behind. Before the cracked mirror in her room, Lena buttoned her plain black dress with hands that trembled only a little. Her reflection was older than she remembered, fine lines at the eyes, silver threaded into the dark hair pinned at her nape. But her gaze no longer carried the hollow weight of yesterday. There was a quiet flame there, stubborn and alive. Samuel Hayes waited on the porch, tall against the dim light, his saddlebag slung across his shoulder. When he turned at the sound of her step, his mouth curved in a small, steady smile. "It's time," he said. Together they walked away from the boarding house without looking back. The wooden door slammed shut behind them like the final page of a long, heavy chapter. Lena's chest beat not with fear, but with release. She was severing ties to years of loneliness, of whispers and shadows. The road to the station lay hushed under morning frost. Fog curled at their ankles, damp and cold. Samuel walked close, his hand always ready to find hers. From time to time he glanced sideways, as if to reassure himself she would not falter at the last step. The train yard rose from the mist, a hulking black engine breathing steam into the pale sky. A few passengers shuffled sleepily, porters hauled trunks, and farther back, townsfolk lingered in clusters, whispering loud enough to be heard. There she is, Lena Carter, running off with the boy Hayes. Shameful. Each word struck like a pebble flung against her skin. But Samuel's hand closed firm around hers, open for all to see. His back was straight, his eyes unflinching. No one stepped forward. At the foot of the platform, Lena's steps slowed. Memories pressed hard. The warmth of a kitchen long gone cold. The scarred table carved with her son's initials. The empty room upstairs where his boots still waited. Silver Creek held all that, yet gave her nothing but scorn. Samuel set down their trunk and turned to her, both hands steady on her shoulders. "You can turn back now if you want," he said. She met his gaze, her own eyes wet but unwavering. "And live the rest of my days in that empty house listening to their venom? No, Samuel. If I leave with you." The whistle shrieked again, urgent, pulling at them. Passengers clambered aboard. Samuel lifted the wooden trunk that held Elias's keepsakes and handed it to the conductor. Lena clutched her small bag close. Inside it, a photograph, a worn Bible, her wedding band. They climbed the steps, found seats near the window. The bench was hard and cold, but when Samuel laid his hand over hers, warmth spread through her chest. Outside, the fog clung, stubborn, but the eastern sky began to blush with light. Faces stared back from the platform, familiar and condemning. But Lena did not bow her head. She sat tall, chin lifted, eyes clear. Samuel leaned close, voice low but fierce. "They have no power over us now." The engine shuddered, steam hissing, wheels grinding against iron rails. The town blurred beyond the window. Church steeple, clappered roofs. The square where whispers had once followed her every step. All of it began to fade into white. Samuel's grip tightened. Do you regret it? Lena turned, her expression calm, almost serene. The rhythm of steel beneath them filled the silence. Then her lips parted, and with quiet conviction she said, "No regrets." The train surged forward, cutting through the fog, racing toward a horizon washed in fire and gold. Behind them, Silver Creek shrank to nothing more than a smudge on the land. Before them stretched a road unknown, dangerous, but filled with possibility. For Lena, for Samuel, it was not escape. It was rebirth. A chance, at last, to claim their own lives, together. Dear friends, if today's story has touched a memory within you of times you had to choose, of the courage it takes to follow the voice of the heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We would be honored to hear your stories, your reflections, and the lessons life has given you. And don't forget to tap like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you can walk with us in the journeys yet to come. Love is never too late, and with every sunrise, each of us is given a chance to begin again.